When I was just a boy, my father was the night watchman at a manufacturing plant located in a rural area between Big Rapids and Chippewa Lake, Michigan. Our house, which, if I remember right, was a perk of the night watchman job. It was across the street from the factory. The plant building was right next to a large wilderness area of state land. At the time, it was simply known as the Hay Marsh, but now it is officially called the Hay Marsh State Game Area. We didn't understand it at the time, but Dad was always very skittish about letting us play outside after dark. He would sometimes talk about hearing coyotes or bears roaming around in the hay marsh when he was walking the perimeter of the building at night. One night, in the summer of 1961, Dad walked back to the house to sit on the porch and have a cup of coffee and a sweet roll. He had a good view of the entire plant property. He saw some movement near a chain link fence behind the building. This was approximately 3 a.m., so he felt quite sure this person wasn't there by accident. He drew his gun and watched for a few minutes. That's when he noticed this was not a person at all, but something much taller. He said it appeared to be covered in brown/gray hair. It had very broad shoulders and a powerful chest. It alternated between walking on 4 legs, then standing up on 2. He said it seemed to be looking for something along the driveway. He later said he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. He quietly moved into the house and grabbed his Kodak Signet 35mm camera, which was his pride and joy. At this point, I should mention that Dad was quite a photography buff. His father had owned one of the first camera stores in all of Ohio, and Dad got the shutter bug from Grandpa. As he stepped back onto the front porch, the creature moved slowly along the driveway, directly underneath the lights. He adjusted the camera shutter for a long exposure, held it as still as he could. He said he was shaking pretty bad by then, and snapped a picture. I have enclosed a print of it in this letter. Dad said a few seconds later, the thing dropped back down to all 4s and slowly moved off into the woods. He sent a print to the local newspaper and sent copies to several magazines. One that I think was called Mysterion published the photo in their spring issue of '62. Dad had a copy of the magazine for years, but it was misplaced after he passed away. I still have the negative strip that contains this image, if you would like to have someone examine it. I also still have my dad's Kodak Signet. I haven't shot any pictures with it for several years, but I'm pretty sure it still works. Sparta, 1987. One weekend, back around fall in 1987, my 2 best friends and I were staying at my family's cabin, which is not too far from the small town of Sparta, about 20 minutes north of Grand Rapids. My 2 friends later left to have dinner while I stayed behind in the cabin. Following the dinner, the men headed back towards Sparta and the cabin. What happened next would shock and disturb them for years. It was dark, and they were on a rural road. Suddenly, both of them saw something standing by the side of the road. In the headlights of the car, it appeared to be a human-like figure covered in gray fur. As they got closer and past the figure, both of them got a very good look at it. It was the size of a man, standing on 2 legs. It was covered head to toe in gray fur, and had a wolf-like face. It even raised its hands and seemed to snarl at them as they drove by. They said it looked like a werewolf right out of a Hollywood movie. my two friends didn't dare stop by. They continued driving. And of course, they were peppering each other up with questions. As they are having this animated conversation, they passed by the sign that says, "Welcome to Sparta," and drove through the small main street and continued out on the town in the direction of my cabin. Their conversation about what had just happened continued when both of them looked up to see the same "Welcome to Sparta" sign again, followed by the same main street that they had just driven through only moments ago. They hadn't stopped or turned around. They had been traveling in the same direction on the same road, but somehow, without any noticeable interruption in their journey, they had somehow been sent backwards several miles. Until this point, it would be easy to dismiss this event as someone merely playing a joke. However, the time displacement characteristic is what sets this encounter apart. While such things are well documented in UFO and alien abduction stories, it's something we've not seen before in Dogman's sighting reports. Andy continues, "I remember when they finally showed up in my cabin. They arrived no later than what I expected them to, around 9 p.m. or so, and I remember how animated they were about their strange encounter. But I just assumed that they had seen a large dog and were telling me an embellished story in order to get a laugh. But 20 years later, both of them still insist that this was no joke. I have no idea what to make of this story. Maybe it was just some teenagers in a werewolf costume playing pranks. And did my friends really experience lost time afterwards? Or did they just make some wrong turns on their drive and didn't notice because they were talking and distracted? I have no idea, but I would love to know if anyone else has seen similar things in the Sparta area." Reed City, 1993. The area around Reed City, Michigan has been a hotbed of Dogman activity. This report details an event that occurred nearly 20 years ago, but the witness remembers it like it was yesterday and is unshakable in her story. Her name is Courtney, and her encounter took place during the winter of 93 into 94. Courtney was a teenager at the time and was sneaking cigarettes behind her parents' home near Todd Lake northeast of Reed City. The sun was setting on a clear, cold winter day. Courtney was facing a large abandoned barn on the property next door. The barn had always kind of spooked me. It was filled with old, rusty equipment. The outer planks were all rotten, and it sagged and leaned in every direction. My dad said to stay away, as the whole thing was weak and could collapse. On that evening, I was standing about 50 feet from the barn and saw sunlight coming through the gaps in the sliding. Courtney took her eyes off the barn for a few minutes. Then, something caught her attention again. There was movement. The light flickered, but I couldn't really tell what it was. Then it turned its head back and looked straight at me. It was at least 6 feet tall, if not more. It was dark colored. It had a dog-like appearance, pointy nose and really big, pointy ears. Courtney dashed into her house to grab a flashlight. When she returned outside, she shined it toward the barn door, but the animal was no longer there. She walked closer to the barn to look for tracks in the heavy snow. When she didn't see any, she realized the creature might still be inside and ran back to the safety of the house. She never saw the creature again. She later talked to a neighbor who had seen something the size of a buffalo but the shape of a dog in the same barn just a few months before Courtney's encounter. The neighbor said she had been so frightened she was near hysterics for days. Her father had taken his gun and searched the barn, but found nothing. At the time of these events, neither of the girls had heard of the legend song and did not know about the Michigan Dogman until years later. Watersmeet, 1994. This report comes to us from an anonymous contributor who grew up in a nearby county, but spent many years of summer camping on family property in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. This encounter took place in the area of Watersmeet, home of the famous Paulding Lights phenomenon. Oddly enough, the Paulding Lights are also known as the Dog Meadow Lights. I was 13, had just gotten new rollerblades for Christmas, and since the main road where our property sits is paved, I couldn't wait to ride around. I went blading by myself and stopped to rest for a second. On this road, the woods are so thick, there's not much space between the road and the woods in most parts. And I remember seeing trees pushed down on the road that my dad said was done by bears, since my dad was an avid bear hunter. I remember not hearing any of your normal sounds of nature, not even birds. The air was still, and the sky would be pure dark in not too long. I was deciding to turn back when I heard a rustling behind me, and something emerged from the left side of the road. I assumed it was a deer, and paused and made myself as quiet as I could so I could watch, and slumped down on my stomach in the middle of the road. It was about 600 feet ahead of me. When I got myself settled in the road to watch it and look up, I realized what I was looking at wasn't a deer. It was on all fours, with brown, grayish fur. At first, I feared the worst, thinking a bear had caught my scent, until I saw its outline and color. I thought I was looking at a dog until I realized the face was too primitive looking, like a fox or a coyote's. At this point in my life, I had never seen a wolf in real life, and it was far too far for me to make it out of the face exactly. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources has always recognized that wild wolves still roamed in Upper Peninsula, although they were thought to be in very limited numbers, and only in extremely remote areas. It is conceivable this witness was seeing one of those wolves, but then something strange happened. It extended its front legs, and in the slowest, longest seconds of my life, stood up on its hind legs, sniffed the air, walked for about 5 steps, then got back down on all fours and walked to the other side of the woods, then disappeared. I don't remember how long I laid in the middle of the road, staring in the empty space. I saw this thing stand, like a human. I remember my jaw hanging down as low as it could, and a pool of drool on the cement underneath it. It finally clicked in my mind that perhaps I should rollerblade my butt back to camp as quick as I could. The witness reports that while the creature never stalked or pursued her, she slept very little during the rest of the family camping trip. She never told anyone about what she had seen, fearing she would be ridiculed. At the time of her sighting, she had never heard of the legend song, and would not until 2004. She moved to Southern California in 2008, and has no interest in camping ever again. Pina, 2001. My dad and I have a story to tell about our encounters with the Dogman. My dad's story took place in the mid-70s. There is a cemetery behind the Alpena High School and a wooded area beyond that. There are many trails that run through here. In this area is a place called the Sandies, where all the young kids would go and party. My dad and 2 of his buddies were in a canoe in broad daylight, paddling from the sandies around the back of the cemetery. The banks of the river are 10 to 12 feet high in places, and some trails run right to the edge. The three of them saw what looked to be a big dog running behind them on the trail. They didn't pay much attention to it until they heard a splash. When they looked, it was swimming after them. Then it went from a dog paddle to the chest and front legs coming out of the water and wading after them. They decided right then not to wait around to see what it was. Honestly, I thought it was BS at the time, and I'm not sure even to this day if it was something they had been smoking or drinking. Then around 2001 to 2002, I was leading some friends through the Sandy's trails. I used to like taking people out, even without a flashlight, tell them my dad's story just to freak them out. The girls were freaked out before we even got into the woods, so I decided not to scare them that night. In the river are small several islands connected by a small sliver of land. At that time, there were 3 such islands chained together, and I took them through to the last one, which was planted with pines in nice even rows. I was the first one back there, about 30 seconds ahead, when one of the girls got her foot hung up on something. As I was going back to help her, there was a spot where the trees make a sort of roof effect, which is really cool looking at night with the moon shining through. At that point, I saw something. I'm not sure what it was, but it sent me running out double time. When my buddy saw my face, he didn't say a word, he just followed, both of us dragging the girls behind. When he asked me later why I came out in such a hurry, I told him it was because I thought I had seen something at the other end of the island walking through the trees that was very tall and not likely human. He may not have believed me, but he never questioned it either. I'm still not sure what I saw. It could have easily been that I scared myself with my dad's story and was seeing things, but I know this: I still don't like the dark, and even though I love hunting, I hate going out before the sun comes up during deer season. Bendin, 2007. This sighting report is told secondhand by the brother-in-law of the witness. The witness is a prominent person in local government and wishes to remain anonymous. The situation started last Saturday night around midnight when he was coming home from a friend's house in Benzonia and taking the back way home to Traverse City. He stated that while down Cinder Road, several miles outside of the town of Bendin, he observed a pair of eyes reflecting off his headlights directly ahead of him. Thinking that it was probably a deer alongside of the road, he began to slow down. As he got closer, however, he stated that the object was much larger and much darker than a deer. He said that by this time, he had slowed to around 30 miles per hour and was at that point several hundred feet from the creature, which still had not moved. As he approached further, he stated that the only way he could describe the creature was being similar to a very large, dark wolf. However, he observed that this thing wasn't on 4 legs, but was upright, back 2 legs standing near a road-killed deer. He estimated that the creature stood a little over 6 feet tall and had very dark fur. He stated that, by now, he was going slow enough to bring his truck to a stop in the road and observe the creature, which had not yet moved and was still staring at him. He told me that for a brief second, he believed that the object was a giant stuffed animal, put there as some kind of a joke, due to the fact that he had never seen anything like this in his life, and that he was able to drive up on it as close as he was, without it having moved an inch. He told me, however, that before he could finish that thought, the creature dropped to all four legs and sprinted across the road and disappeared into the woods on the other side of the roadway. He told me that he stayed frozen in his seat for a minute, wondering in the middle of the road at what the heck had just happened. I jokingly asked him if he had been drinking that night, and with a deadly serious face, he sternly stated, "No. Whatever that was, it was real." As perplexed as he was that night over what he had seen, he was deathly afraid to go wandering into the woods to investigate further. He said that in using a flashlight, he observed an animal's tracks leading into the woods on the opposite side of the road, and was fortunate enough that night to have his digital camera with him. He showed me a photograph of the paw print, which he said appeared to be about 7 or 8 inches long. He had another picture of the same paw print where he had placed a shotgun shell in the middle of it for scale. He told me that he was lucky that the side of the road was so soft, because he wasn't willing to go any farther than 2 or 3 steps away from the door to his truck just to get a picture. I inquired if the animal had made any sounds before it disappeared, and he said that he did not hear it make any noise, and were it not for the picture, I inquired if the animal had made any sounds before it disappeared, and he said that he did not hear it make any noise, and were it not for the picture, he would have thought that he had imagined the whole thing. I asked him if it could have been a bear, and he stated, "Absolutely not. He bear hunts every year in the Upper Peninsula, so he obviously knows what bears look like up close." That's his story. Believe it if you'd like. If I didn't know him as well as I do and hadn't seen pictures, I would have said that he was out of his mind. I've heard the song and know some of the stories, but always believed it was just for entertainment value. After this happened though, I am looking at all of this under a whole new light.